it is time to consider the bracing of the back. Now, I've been doing a little bit of research on this, and there have been some fairly fancy-ass innovations in recent years in terms of back bracing. I've seen the use of cross X braces, fan patterns, and I've seen people mirroring the bracing of the front on the back. And I question really whether this is strictly necessary, whether it's just innovation for the sake of it, getting your guitars noticed, for instance, which is one reason of doing it. But don't forget, the front used to be ladder braced, and X braces were introduced to combat the pull of the strings, and we don't have those considerations on the back. So why would we change ladder bracing? What are the design decisions for doing so? And I'll come back to this specifically for my guitar, because I do have some considerations in this department. But there seems to be a consensus among makers that the back and the front, although they are working as a unit, but you have to have the back vibrating at a slightly different frequency to the front. And I worry that if the back is braced the same as the front, then the series of frequency peaks for all the different modes of vibration are going to be very similar between the front and the back. Whereas if the bracing pattern is different between the front and the back, the modes of vibration are going to be different. The distribution of their frequencies is going to be different. It seems to be generally accepted that the fundamental frequency of the back should be a few semitones higher than the front. The back is there to complement the front, and it helps to smooth out the frequency peaks of the front, the natural resonances of the front. And it's a system. So I think having a different bracing pattern on the back is an advantage to having the same bracing. I don't see there's any compelling technical reason to not ladder brace the back. That's what I'm saying. Having said that, we need to look at the back of my guitar, the plank of wood, the board that I'm going to be using, because it does have some particular considerations. Here is my back in all its glory, the back of my guitar. I have a weird back, it hurts sometimes. Anyway, I can't emphasize enough how weird this feels when you flex it. It doesn't feel like a standard board. And looking at the grain, it's easy to understand why. Because we've got the nice, well, almost parallel grain up here. And remember, on boards, we have not much stiffness in that direction, and ladder bracing helps that. Whereas we have quite a good amount of stiffness in that direction, where in fact on the back we don't have any braces. Except for the back graft, which isn't a brace. I'll come to that in a minute. But when you look down here, the grain lines are actually going this direction. The grain's turned 90 degrees, and this area feels completely different to the rest of it. It's not the stiffest piece of wood, even with the change of grain direction, but it is definitely stiffer in that direction and reasonably floppy in that direction compared to the rest of the board. So it feels weird. It feels like there's seams coming in here. You can see these lines, this sort of Y shape. And certainly if you've got, say, 3 steel plates hinged in a Y shape, that's how it feels to me. It really does feel odd. So I'm wondering where to have the back on this, because I've got a choice about how much of this grain I leave in. My current feeling is I'd probably cut it off about there and ignore all of this really weird stuff down here. But it does look rather nice, and should I leave it in? And if I leave it in, do I need to brace across the grain, i.e. have some extra little finger braces at the base of the guitar? These are decisions for later. You'll notice I've been sitting next to my Chladni jig, Chladni patterns. Go watch the video, although I haven't got a final video ready yet using this, because I've I've tried using glitter and static cling, I don't think it's working. What this is meant to do, there's a monitor speaker under here. It vibrates the top, the back. I'm also going to put another guitar on this. I've got a weird guitar to show you, which you'll see in a later video. This is meant to vibrate the top so we can examine what its various frequencies are. Now, as a free plate that is not guitar shaped, this doesn't give us that much information, but I'm curious to know how this area vibrates, if it vibrates at all. Whether in the Chladni patterns, the modes of vibration, we can see how this area is working. It may not be useful information, but before I make a final decision on where to have the guitar back, I'd like to see that information. It may factor in to how I cut the back out. So today we're just going to be concerned with preparing the stock for the braces. The split stock that I'm going to use for the ladder braces, but also the back graft using offcuts from the front. Now the back graft's a funny thing. It's not a brace as such. What the back graft is doing is it's just strengthening this centre seam. I wonder whether with modern glues and well-behaved wood, back grafts are strictly necessary, but I kind of suspect this isn't going to be well-behaved wood, so I think a back graft is entirely necessary for this. And I'm going to make a continuous strip that goes all the way up, and because a piece of spruce that wide with that grain direction, it doesn't exist, so we're going to have to glue pieces together. What we need from this is we want the grain direction in the back graft going in this direction, so it's providing strength along the seam. It's holding the seam together. It's not acting as a brace. So that involves an overnight glue up, gluing several pieces together. So this is just cutting out the braces is 2 days work for me, 2 afternoons work. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video, and you'll find out in a future video my decision on how much of this grain to leave in. I hope that all makes sense. I now have one reference edge which is parallel to the grain lines, and unfortunately the 2 other faces are not perpendicular to that, but I'll sort that out on the bandsaw. This was stock I've split previously, and I hope you can see that the grain lines are now absolutely parallel to that edge. And at the end, actually not quite that end, the grain is twisted a bit. Yeah, we're not perfect, but I think we're close enough. We're certainly parallel down there, and then the grain just twists off a little bit. For the first cut, all I'm trying to do is take a whisker off just to get the end square, and then I'm hoping I can do the second cut balancing on a thin edge, holding it firm against the fence. We'll see how that goes, but we're doing that as the first cut. Still a little wide. I want to get the maximum out of these pieces, so I'm just trying to ease the fence in to get it exactly the right width. There we go, 13.49. 13.6 by 10.4. For the back graft, I've first got to square the edge to the grain, because the grain's going to be running across the graft, because we're going across the grain with the back. And then I'm going to take a number of strips and glue them end to end to create my long strip. Going to check that that gives me the length I need. It does. Just get all the edges square. That was more of a chopping action than a sawing action, but it got the result. Oh, so much for that. Try again. We need an end stop really. I ought to be using my proper shooting board, but this is all a bit small scale. I figured just an improvised shooting board like this would work. If I move everything over and clamp it twice from the end, yeah, that's what I'll do. I just created a bigger problem for myself. When I switched the camera off, I caught the edge and snapped the two pieces, but that's okay because these are perfect gluing surfaces. I don't need to worry about truing them up. They will just glue back together. So I'm still dealing with this edge here and eventually this edge here. Oh well. Actually, I probably didn't need this piece on the end. But so I think I've only ended up with one extra join in them, but oh well. Let's try that again, this time with a levelling beam. This is a bit gentler. And I think has given me a very good edge actually. The masking tape is important because it matches the height of the sandpaper. I think that's given me what I need. I'm ready for the glue up, and as it happens I don't need the one broken piece, so it was of no consequence. I've still got an extra join in here, but that doesn't really matter. It will glue back together quite well because it's just a clean break. So, levelling beam, piece of spruce on the floor. Let's get everything ready. All the joints are marked so I know I've got everything the right way around. Piece of greaseproof paper, just for safety, just in case the glue decides to adhere to the polished but with scratches surface of the levelling beam. At least everything seems to be straight. Shouldn't have much planing to do afterwards to get it. Actually, the danger is planing the edge. I'm going to have to be very careful because I might do it on the bandsaw because I've got to be careful not to break it. Just the gentlest of pressure. That's it. Right, walk away. I'm just going to leave that now overnight, make sure the glue's absolutely dry before I touch it. And it does have a very slight bow in it, but I've got plenty of width to get the required thickness. I can take 5mm off it, so that's fine. This has had nearly a day to dry, so the glue should be fine, but it's a little bit irregular and a little bit grubby. I'm not entirely sure why it's so grubby. It's not very straight, which I'll take care of on the bandsaw, and I'm going to tidy up the surface and do a bit of thicknessing on the drum sander. I've no doubt that some of you think the drum sander is now going to tear this to shreds and probably break it in two. This is very fragile because of the cross grain. I have confidence in my drum sander, but comment now if you think this is going to break. And I'm wondering whether I've just spotted a crack, but I think that might be a pencil mark. I think we're going to be fine. I trust my drum sander. I've now got two smooth sides, but you'll notice it's starting to bend a little bit. This doesn't, if you take this slowly, it doesn't generate really any heat. I guess this side is maybe, you can feel that it's warmer than the other side, possibly. This is the side I've just been sanding, and so it was curling up. But it's barely noticeable. But clearly something is happening. This table is quite cold. It is winter after all. Shortest day of the year. And clearly either moisture or thermal is making this. It's of no consequence. It will straighten out, but and of course it flattens when it's going through the drum sander, so it's not going to affect the thicknessing. But it's just something to bear in mind. I flipped it over and took it through a couple more times, and it's now flat. So this, I think this is thermal. It must be the coldness of the table just causes the underside to contract a little bit, and it puckers. Actually, that doesn't make sense. It's curling upwards, which implies that the underneath is. I don't know. It's going in the opposite direction to which I would expect, but it's now flat. I'm going to straighten it with the bandsaw, and I'm going to take this in several passes because it's so banana shaped. It's still coming onto the fence as I'm feeding it, so I don't want this to get trapped against the blade and snap. So I'm just going to take a number of passes to get this side straight and then flip it. I'll be able to just push it straight through once I've got the one side straight. So hopefully this will just shave off nicely. I mean, I can almost get it through like that anyway. So I'll just take it down 1/2 millimetre at a time, being very, very careful about this. more. I'm just going to do a little bit of the other side, just to take the wings off, because it's still the fence isn't long enough. I've got a little bit of tear out. This was a bit of a brutal way of doing this, and obviously the top edge fine, bottom edge very fuzzy and with the tear out, but that's okay, and this will tidy up with sandpaper. But I've now got a nice straight regular 16mm by 3mm strip, so I'm quite happy with that. Just a couple of little bits of tear out. I guess as the drum sander's still set up to thickness, this thickness, I could just tidy it up with the drum sander. Let's see if this works. Not bad. One final drum sander operation. I'm just going to use it to take the bandsaw marks out of the braces. One of the things I like about my drum sander is if you feel so inclined, you can work to amazing precision. I wanted this 10mm wide, and yeah, well, I've overshot. Oh dear, never mind. Of course, that sort of accuracy is completely unnecessary, but I like doing it. Can I just point out an advantage of using split stock? If you remember from many videos ago, I split the lump of spruce I'm using with a froe to get it split down the grain lines. What we're looking at here is the tree is growing up in that direction, as that's longitudinal. We're going into the middle of the tree here. This is radial, this direction. We can see about 5 rings, 5 slices through the tree. And then this face here is tangential. This is around the outside of the tree. And as I've said, we can see about 5 grain lines, 5 rings. But on this face, no grain at all. We're completely parallel with the rings of the tree. There's a slight shadow of a grain line up here, but this is completely in line with the grain, and so we have maximum stiffness in this direction here. For flexing in this direction, maximum stiffness, and yeah, I really like that. It's kind of perfect. The back graft is 3mm thick by 16mm wide. I will profile it probably when it's on the back of the guitar. I'll put a sort of semicircular profile. I'll just sand down the edges, possibly plane them. The top braces are 8mm wide by 11.5mm high, and the bottom braces are 10mm wide and 13.5mm high. And no, I don't know what that is in freedom units, but I'm sure I can caption it on the screen.